Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down having real conversations with real Texans about what's going on in our state. Today, I am excited to be joined by my colleague, Judge Shepard. Judge has written a groundbreaking research paper called Hijacked, How the Bond Process is Being Used Against You, the Taxpayers. He's going to dig in deep into why your property taxes keep going up, and no matter how many promises made, they aren't kept because our system has been hijacked. Judge, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Mandy. And as always, we'll clarify for the record, Judge is a name, not a title. But yes, I'm so very excited to be here to talk today about this new research product we have. And it really kind of shines a light on why we continuously see, relief being done at the legislature. However, it doesn't always come down into your actual tax bill. And part of that, as people kind of know, your M&O, your ISD taxes, the M&O portion is generally going to be about 40% of your tax bill. And that's usually kind of the largest amount. And that is strictly all done through local property taxes. The state does not levy a property tax. And kind of what we've seen is the way the system is set up, that basically we have some kind of rogue players who have figured out how to profit off the system, and it's in their best interest to keep having bigger bonds proposed every year and to keep passing these bonds.
Yep. Thank you for breaking that down, the maintenance and operations, and how the interest in seeking part keeps going up and being used by the profiteers, right? These are the architects, engineering, construction, bond planning firms. And the interesting thing that your paper really highlights and that we're going to dig into is that they're all the same people. They set up different entities to walk all of our communities down the plank and dive into massive amounts of debt. How much debt are Texans looking at right now?
So local government debt in general is over $500 billion with a T. And
Trillion.
Trillion.
Local debt.
That's
local. Run up by our local entities.
So that's
not
counties, counties, cities, schools, hospital districts, specials, mud, bud, spud, whatever you want to name it.
Yep.
And so of that, ISD is about $236 billion. And with a B, yes, that is, your children have been mortgaged their future.
Yes, that is because when people are looking at their tax bills, particularly after the past several sessions, they've been told at the state level that they are giving property tax relief. And moms and dads and Texans are just looking at what they're getting and what is owed. And they say, where is it? I don't see the, 17 billion. I don't see this. I don't see that. Talk about how this system has been hijacked from the beginning, the bond planning, the bond pitching process. Talk to us what's happening.
Okay, so to start off, let's say the Constitution, Article 7, Section 3 gives schools the ability to levy tax and go into debt for public school improvements. From that, we go to the Texas Education Code, Chapter 45, 45001 to 03. Also gives them the ability to have a levy debt, but to do so, they have to have voter approval, and that is compounded by the Government Code 1251. Okay. So that's your framework to where if a public school wants to go out for a bond that is debt that they will be taking on, and those are kind of where it's found in statutory law of how they go to this process.
Okay.
Now, how the whole bond process works is essentially, under the Education Code, schools are not allowed to electioneer, and so schools are not supposed to be going out and preaching, pass this bond. So in order to do that, well, they're not supposed to. They're not supposed to, in theory at least. And so what they do is they have political action committees, which, everybody knows what PACs are. This is, basically groups that are put together to solicit donations to support a candidate, proposition, you name it. Yeah. And so therefore, what we've kind of noticed is what this research paper really goes into depth is, I went and looked through about probably 7 or 8 bond elections in 2023. And so what I did was, for each ISD bond election, I went and found the PAC, and you can do that by going through the Texas Ethics Commissions. You find their filer name, and that'll show the donations made and who made them. And so what I've done from that is I've taken all of these kind of PAC donations and who put in what amount of money. And then once these bonds pass, it takes a little while for those bond proceeds to start being, sent out. And basically what we found is that there's a key number of players that contend in bonds all over the state that continuously make small donations of $1,000 to $2,000 and then turn around and get millions in dollars worth of contracts.
And these are the people that we refer to as the profiteers.
Yes.
That's the part of the education cartel. And it's easy. You pointed out that you can go to the Ethics Commission. You can also go to Transparency USA. And honestly, you can just type in the word friends and you're going to see you're going to see 100 different bonds come up. Friends of this public school system, friends of Kamal, friends of Bear, friends of Forney, friends of Dripping. But it's always this. And then if you click on them, you'll see it's always the same people.
Yep.
Who are funding the bonds? Who are starting the bonds and funding who are starting the PACs and funding the PACs?
So it's basically kind of neighborhood groups in cahoots with a lot of you, as we mentioned, profiteers, your construction firms, your consulting firms, or architecture, engineering, any sort of services of that nature.
Those that are going to get the business.
Yes.
So it effectively, the reason it's been hijacked is because it's a pay-to-play scheme.
Yes.
You're paying into a PAC a small amount of money. Your research dug into how much money that we're seeing. And so what did you find for every $1 or $100 given by these architecture, engineering, and construction profiteers? What are you finding?
So basically, it's phenomenal when it comes to investment returns. I mean, you're looking at, in some cases, up to 1,000% return. And so that's being said, a modest donation of $2,500 can end up being $2 million plus in contracts to that entity down the road. And so, I mean, if we just want to get in, I can start going through, some of them.
Start listing them off. Let's hear.
So let's start off with Conroe ISD 2023. They had about 4 propositions. 3 of them passed. It was about $2 billion. However, when you go to the PAC donations, which was Community for Conroe ISD's Future, and so basically I kind of zeroed in 7 firms. They contributed about $27,500, so under $30,000. However, since July or up to July 2024, those 7 entities have been paid over $26 million in bond proceeds. They have gotten the contracts. Yes.
Say it again. The architecture, engineering, construction firms that donated fairly modest amounts.
$27,500
total.
They have reaped over $26 million in bond contracts.
Within less than 3 years.
Yeah.
Within less than 3 years. To be clear, there's more coming. There's more money that's coming. That's just what we can see.
Yeah, that's $26 million out of the almost $2 billion that the bond was for.
So let's walk back the why. Why is this happening? What is the disconnect between the legislature and property tax relief that they keep giving out every 2 years, and we're on a biennium? Every 2 years, our state leadership, our legislature works hard to figure out where can they give Texans their money back, stop taxing them to the hilt. Where is the disconnect, the break, where what's happening at the legislature is not being felt at the local level? Why?
And that is because the locals are in charge of that.
Okay.
And so no matter what we do in the big pink building, if your local taxing entities don't, the way things are going right now, everybody's being forced to tighten up their belt, However, we're not seeing our local taxing entities do that, particularly in our ISDs, because essentially, all of the money that we get in relief is gobbled up before it gets to your tax bill, because they're saying, okay, they're going to get $300 in relief. That's $300 that we can already add to the tax bill. That's going to go down on them. And so essentially, you see it perfectly laid out in the governor's plan, spending limits, higher voting thresholds, and, moving localities onto the same sort of budgetary standards that we have for the state, which is, tied to population and inflation.
Yeah.
And so that is really the key to getting on top of all this is, a little bit of guardrails on the local level, because that is where all of this is coming from. That's what, that's kind of one of the big things that we try to harp and get the message out is like, this is not caused by the state.
Right.
The state is trying to help in this scenario. However, you can't, at the local level, they're not responding and they're not following suit.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the districts that are in there that we know. Give me another district or how about an architecture firm? Let's talk about some of these architecture firms who also are the part of the bond pre-planning groups.
So let's say, well, you can kind of have your pick. We can start with either VLK. We can go with Huckabee and Associates, the largest school architecture firm or school architect or building. Basically, they build the most schools than anybody in the nation. I mean, they've showed up through numerous of these bond elections that I've kind of gone through in the research.
Let's talk about Huckabee. That is owned by a gentleman named Christopher Huckabee. Christopher Huckabee also went into business with Charles Butt of HEB, the former chairman of House Public Education, Dan Huberty, Charles Klein, and a few others. And they purchased a financial education firm called Moat Casey. Some of our viewers may remember me talking about Moat Casey. Of course, their former CEO, who's now, I think, on the board, but Gilcrease is the one who stood up at a TASB meeting and told multiple panels of trustees, don't give teacher pay raises. We need to weaponize them for, and I'm quoting a trustee that was there that went on camera. So that's where people may recognize this name. But Christopher Huckabee has been a part of that company. Something interesting in looking into it is I found that his firm, Huckabee and Associates, was acquired or invested in by private equity from out of state. I can track two different ones. It was Godspeed Capital and One Point Capital. These private equity firms, who we know private equity, their objective is to come in and figure out ways to turn a higher profit. Sure. And so it's real interesting to see that there's a whole new industry in architecture, engineering, construction. Many of these private equity firms that used to invest in defense contracting have now switched over to saying, we're going to go into the states, and particularly Texas, because we are the 8th largest economy in the world. Our bonds have a AAA bond rating because it's backed by the 8th largest economy in the world, and they're going into our districts. It's not just Huckabee. You mentioned VLK, PBK, but they're going in and they're selling this idea of grandeur. They're selling this idea that if you build the fanciest, the newest, the best, then you'll have more students. They're working with demographers that, from the looks at what we can see, they've completely overestimated how many kids are going to be attending these schools. And so I want our viewers to understand that this is why I call it a cartel. The entire system, as you noted, has been hijacked to figure out a way to use propaganda in our local districts. And let's talk about how few of people go in and actually vote on these bonds. There's two things that Texans need to know. One, the same cartel that have the taxpayer-funded lobbyists at the legislature fought against putting this is a tax on these bonds. They did not want that on a couple years ago. They fight on these reforms that you mentioned. Governor Abbott is spearheading. He is trying to make sure that these reforms are taking place at the legislative level so they can't get in and rig that system. But then they're coming in and selling. It's keeping up with the Joneses, but it's keeping up with the next neighborhood. And they are, I think, luring a very small percentage of voters, less than 10%, right, on most of these bonds. They're luring them into these voting precincts under the guise of this will improve your community, and they are shackling them with, what did you say, $236 billion in debt.
Yes. And that kind of brings up, a good thing, because, traditionally we see, lower turnout in the May elections.
Yeah.
And
they fought against that too.
Well, yeah, that as well as, because what's happening in May? You're just a mom, your kids are getting out of school, You're either going on vacation, you got to figure out childcare.
Mm-hmm.
I have no children. I'm the son of a public school teacher, though. I know when school's out, everybody's happy.
Yeah.
So say one of our coworkers here, John Monroe, recently put out a paper talking about the voter thresholds for these bond elections, and he made some really good acknowledgments and some really good data there. Just looking at, the things that I looked at here, these May and November 2023 bonds, basically, in May, you have 245 bond proposals, about 79% passed, and that came out to about almost $23 billion in local debt added. That's just in the May elections. Let's go to the November of 23 elections. On that one, we've got about 64% of 199 proposed bonds passed. That added another $19.5 billion. And that's with just a simple majority, 50 plus 1. However,
percentage of voters, not
yes.
registered voters. And this is really, really important because it's hardly anybody showing up.
Yeah. However, what John Bonura, our colleague, was able to really kind of show, and this is strictly looking at the threshold of votes taken. Mm-hmm. So if we move from a simple majority of 50 plus 1 to 60, if we had done that for these 2023 bond elections, we're looking at, for May, only a little over about 51%, a little over half would have passed, which would have saved about $5 billion.
Okay.
And then for November, same thing. It would have actually dropped dramatically to less than 1/3 would have passed, about 29%, which would have also saved about $11.5 billion.
We have to do that.
That's simply going at a 60%. You know,
Yeah.
we still don't know until bill filing time what exactly that percentage is going to be. We did it on 60, and I believe maybe 70 or 65. I mean, you can find that website on texaspolicy.com and read that for yourself. But that just kind of really shows, you know, a simple thing like raising the threshold from something other than simple majority shows real savings when it comes to these bond elections.
Agreed. Also, a simple change, because what people don't necessarily realize is that we would like to see all of the bond elections move to November, right? Of course, the education cartel, the profiteers, these lobbyists, these firms that work in this, they fight against that with their taxpayer-funded lobbyists. So effectively, they steal our money to go pay lobbyists to fight so that we don't have bond elections in November. And that needs to change as well, because as you noted, it's such a small percentage. You know, I talked to our colleague Jose Melendez about a recent bond that just passed in Royal ISD. Less than 3,000 kids. I think it's right around 20% of kids in high school can read on grade level, which is criminal in my opinion. I do not understand how these kids keep getting passed through. We are failing them educationally. But the community did not want to invest more money in a fancy new football stadium. They declined last year a $9 million bond. But then you get the education cartel that comes in and they sell them on the idea of a big grand football stadium. And they start the bond, they fund the bond, and of course they pass the bond with I think it was around 3% of the registered voters in that district. 3%, a $72 million football stadium for a high school where 20% of kids can read. And that is debt that they are shackling. So after all these kids leave, they can't read, where can they get jobs? They're in their community, and they're going to be paying for a football stadium so that one of these architects, engineering, construction firms can make millions of dollars off of them. It absolutely is so amoral that these entities are set up to come in and lie and pillage from taxpayers.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because that brought up another one of the recommendations I make in my paper. Because, you know, as you said, they had tried for a bond previously. And what we see in a lot of districts is, you know, they'll come out with a bond in May, it won't pass, and they'll just repackage and rerun the system again. And some cases we'll see they'll go and ask for more and do that within 6 months. Yeah, and do that within 6 months or a year of their last bond election. And so kind of one of the recommendations I put forward in this research is a mandatory cooling off period of a year or two. And that is regardless of if a bond passed or not. Yeah. And I think that would be very helpful, because you're not wearing down the voters by continuously coming at them and asking for more money, as well as, I mean, it really would put, you know, some of these entities and ISDs especially, you know, it really kind of makes them tighten their belts and have some fiscal restraint. 'Cause it's like, all right, if you want to come out for a bond, you got to be able to show that it's in the best interest of everyone in the district for this.
Right. And it should be for educational purposes. This is the thing that blows my mind, is it's just a racket set up by these profiteers. Because, I mean, we're looking at it right now in Austin ISD. Austin ISD, ever since, I mean, I would say Gina Hinojosa's reign of failure as president, where she refused to partner with high quality school operators that could have improved the educational setting. They refused to make the cuts. They refused to shut down schools. It was all this idea, which I think, unfortunately, far too many politicians buy into, is I can't be tough, I can't be stern, I can't do what's best for the long term. And then they kick the can down the road. Now she's trying to, you know, run for higher office. But meanwhile, AISD is struggling with mass exodus. Anybody that can get out is leaving, and understandably so. Their kids can't read, and they've invested, I think, $100 million in facilities that are being closed down. All run by the profiteers. The word hijacked perfectly explains this. I think that your paper captures it beautifully. Tell us a few of the other recommendations that you've come up with after researching this entire network of nefarious profiteers that are confiscating our tax dollars?
I mean, so I've got a couple there, as mentioned. I mean, some cooling off period as far as bond elections, raising the threshold, as well as, what we see as far at the state level when it comes to, certain state contracts and things like that. If you're an entity that puts in a request for proposal, you can't do that if you were one of the people who helped build the actual, proposal for itself. So if you're helping set up the system, you can't turn around and bid on the system or the contract that you just helped write. And that's at the state level. I think we should apply that at the local level as well.
So we have that at the state level.
Yeah.
Okay, we absolutely should do that because, you talk about that. There's another entity, another architecture firm that you, I think, mentioned, VLK Architects. Yeah. It's one of the second or third largest builders in the nation as well. And one of their leaders, he's the, I think, K through 12 principal is what they call him. He's an executive. He's been there for a long time. His name is Scott Milder. And Scott Milder and Leslie Milder, he and his wife started this entity called Friends of Texas Public Schools with the funding of Charles Butt, of course, that bought into Moat Casey.
Those drag queen people?
Well, they partner with Pastors for Texas Children. So you might be thinking, yes, they do host an annual conference, Pastors for Texas Children and Friends of Texas Public Schools. And yes, Pastors for Texas Children are the radical, insane people that, promote, drag queens and other pornographic images in our libraries. So that's a whole other thing. But yeah, the Milders also, so he works at one of the largest architecture firms, but then they started in their side hustles. This is what I talk about. They have Friends of Texas Public Schools that partner with all these other radical orgs. Then they also have Friends Consulting Group, and we can look back and go look at the Prosper Bond. They did the consulting there, and of course it's big, and the grandeur of these facilities, how much money we are spending. And for what? We're giving it all to these architects, engineering, construction firms. But basically, what's happening is they're on the front end. They were the bond planning committee, Friends of Texas.
Them and TASB and Casey and
that's right. They're all there. Planning, They all were just at they have, you mentioned TASB. They have these leadership conferences multiple times a year. And of course, who's funding it? Who's investing in it? Who's there in their showrooms and hosting casino nights afterwards after the trustee training with, big, huge gifts and Yeti coolers and alcohol flowing and all of that. Why, it's all of the architecture, engineering, construction firms that are going to I'll create your pack. Or my buddy over here, let me just take off my VLK architecture firm. We'll get to that down the road once we have the bond passed. But I'm going to put on my Friends Consulting Group hat. And here we'll come in. Yeah. And according to the Milder's own website, it says that they have a 94% success rate in passing these bonds, which explains why this has exploded. Yeah. Because it is the hungry hippos who just keep gobbling up every single dime in Texans' bank account to build elaborate facilities. While, by the way, 50% of kids across the state of Texas cannot read on grade level.
Some other recommendations, I don't know if I've named it specifically in this paper, but it's been brought up numerous times in the past. And, going to pre-approved plans for school buildings, things like that. There's no reason to have all these grand, billion, $100 million facilities. If we're gonna do something of that nature, I think we should have one kind of standardized, facility plan depending on the size of your school. Yeah. And essentially, I hate to compare it to track homes, but kind of like track homes, okay, you have this many kids, so you're gonna need this many classrooms, you're gonna pick this model. Yeah. And it's got a set price, and we know how much it's gonna cost depending on materials and labor.
That's right. 100% agree. And I know that Senator Hinojosa loves that idea too, to do some sort of design build, whether it's one or a couple of options. Yeah. But that's exactly it, that you can build effectively. This is what it is. And you know what? If you want to go and fundraise for better fixtures or something along those lines, then please, by all means, go do that. You can go take advice from over there at Barbers Hill. They seem to be good at figuring out ways to fundraise for their education foundation, and I want to jump over to that. But if the community actually wants to spend the money and invest in X, Y, and Z fancy items. But what we're seeing is that they are packaging together these massive bonds and saying the football, the $72 million football stadium should also be with the $100 million elementary school, with the $400 million high school. I mean, this is what they're doing, and it's take it or leave it, people. And it's a really, really just evil plan that they have concocted to just walk taxpayers down the plank of debt. And that is something that is such a huge problem. So I 100% agree with you on we need design build. I hope Senator Hinojosa picks that up and that we have others that get behind that. But I mentioned Barbers Hill ISD. You've also recently released another paper on some research. Let's jump into that really quick.
So the Barbers Hill ISD and the Barbers Hill Education Foundations are very, very interesting, kind of dynamic there. It really kind of shines a light as what's going on down there, basically. And so, education foundations typically are 501c3 nonprofits that are built up, to solicit private donations to go and support an ISD or a particular school or something like that. Yeah. I can say off the top of my head, I did not have the number that there are in the state. There is a decent amount though. However, one of the reasons why I looked at Barbers Hill in particular is they're the largest in the nation, and I believe they have around $175 million in assets. That's the foundation. The
foundation has raised $175 million from the community?
Not quite.
Okay, well, how'd they get that money?
Well, as we've kind of seen, going through public records, basically what has been happening, if you look at since, I believe, 2010 or 2012, so fund transfers from the Education Foundation that was set up to help accomplish the goal, as according to their website and their mission statement, is to support and help the goals of Barbers Hill ISD. Yeah. And so if you look
at teacher bonuses, maybe help improve the science lab,
pay for kids to go on field trips, something like that.
Yeah, okay, that would make sense.
Yeah, but what we've kind of seen is if you look at transfers from the money from the Education Foundation to the ISD that is supposed to be supporting.
Yeah, they're donations.
Yeah, so from about 2010 to 2012, they've given about $6.5 million from the foundation to the ISD. Okay. Now let's flip that around and go and look through the other side. It comes out to about $97.1 million has been diverted from the ISD to the Education Foundation.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Taxpayer money.
Yes. Property tax money has been.
Property tax dollars. The ISD has said that their board has said, no, we don't want this to come in our bank account.
It'd be better off going to the foundation.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. And then what? What is the foundation doing with that money? If they've given $6 million and they have $175 million, largest in the country, so what are they doing with it?
Well, I can tell you they've only given about $6.5 million of that to the ISD. However, once we kind of get into that, they're doing a whole lot of things. Okay. And in particular, it seems that they're going into the real estate business. Yes, the Education Foundation has partnered with a private company, and they are building and developing nice either luxury condos and apartments in the Mount Bellevue area. And they're saying it's for teacher workforce housing. However, at the same time, they are still marketing these as, anybody can come and rent. There's
a whole problem with the government trying to provide teacher housing, but I'm not going to go into that. Yeah, but let me just so they partner with a real estate firm. Who's the real estate firm?
Americas Holdings.
Americas Holdings. Okay, and what's the connection there?
So that's a really interesting question, because the more you look into BHISD and BHEF, you see that the boards are pretty much the same. So you've got the superintendent that's on the Education Foundation board and some other school board trustees. However, in particular, there's one gentleman, I believe his name is Nathan Watkins. He's on the board of directors for the Education Foundations, but he's also vice president of America's Holdings. And so they've gone into essentially a joint venture to develop these apartments in the Mont Bellevue neighborhood. And so it kind of really begs the question, what are y'all doing? This is an education foundation that was set up, with the specific goal to help support the ISD. However, once you look at the numbers, the relationship seems to be going the other way around. It seems like, the ISD is the main supporter of the Education Foundation. I mean,
it seems like a seed funder to me. I'm so confused by how. So then I want to know, on this apartment complex, who's making money off this?
That's a great question. I don't have the financials for that, but my understanding is that it's a 50-50 interest between Americas and the Education Foundation.
So So just to confirm, then in theory, I mean, we haven't seen any reports, but I would love to know if the members of the Barbers Hill Education Foundation, if anyone has a personal vested interest, because I don't understand how you would be doing business with your real estate firm and sitting on the board. So you went in partnership, you're utilizing money from the Education Foundation to build this. That seems like some conflicts to me, but I'm not an attorney, so I don't know.
I'd have to go and look back at the CAD records, but I believe at least one of the parcels that the Education Foundation purchased, or America's purchased for this particular deal, was at some point owned by the ISD. Which really, really kind of, makes you wonder what is a conflict of interest and what's going on here.
Is the transferring of money from public dollars to the Education Foundation, which would take it out of oversight? You no longer fall under the required oversight, public information. Yeah. And I do know that I saw Superintendent Greg Poole bragging on TV or something recently, saying they can't touch our money in the Education Foundation. So is that legal to do?
Apparently so.
Huh. That sounds like one of those little nifty loopholes that are created by those taxpayer-funded and legislative lobbyists. Who is Barbers Hill's taxpayer-funded lobbyist?
I believe it is former state representative Craig Island, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so would
he have ever voted on these 313 agreements that allow this to happen? I
mean, Chapter 313 came in, I believe, in 2009, and I believe he was still a member of the legislature at that point. So, I mean, yeah, if it would have gone to a floor vote, at least. Yes, ma'am.
Fascinating. And this goes into why we have to ban taxpayer-funded lobbying, is because people don't realize that these are oftentimes career politicians and staffers who then turn around and either had created the loopholes, had voted on the loopholes, or know how to manipulate loopholes to go in and sell these ideas to entities like Barbers Hill ISD.
I mean, you hear people talking all the time, especially about, in the federal government sense, the so-called revolving door.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it, it seems like it's here in Texas as well.
The revolving door is here in Texas. That's exactly right. Because, I mentioned the gentleman who was responsible as the chairman of House Public Education, Dan Huberty, who now is one of the leaders at Moat Casey. That's, of course, he was leading it when we did the funding finance formula that was created, of course, with Leo Lopez, who was at the TEA at the time. And now both of them are over at Moat Casey. And I think serving a lot of our districts in their financial guidance, including Austin ISD, which is really interesting to me as well. But this revolving door that's occurring where you've got effectively the fox guarding the hen house at every level.
Yep.
And banning taxpayer-funded lobbying, putting a prohibition on legislators and senior staffers to go in and be able to profit off of taxpayers. Because, again, we're funding all of this on both ends of the spectrum.
Yep.
Absolutely insane. Okay. Judge, I want you to look in the camera. Yeah. I want you to tell Texans and tell patriotic legislative leaders what we have to do to take back the bond process from the profiteers who have hijacked it.
Number one, we got to put the same regards we have on the state level and the local level when it comes to, preparing financial documents and then going and bidding on the process. That's number one. Number two, we need to have local level spending limits. Number three, we need to raise voter thresholds. And number four, in particular, I believe there were two bills that were brought up in the 89th, and those would be SB 2572, which prohibited entities that contribute bond supporting political committees from receiving bond-funded contracts.
Yes.
Because same thing as mentioned, as well as HB 506, which would ban nonprofit associations, primarily representing school boards, from contracting with schools, the TEA, or other regional service centers for training, instruction, what have it.
Judge, thank you for your work exposing how this education cartel has hijacked our bond process and our education system. Thank you for joining us today on Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. And now you have the power.